as Gulf conferences, we're identifying the founders, people who are on the leading edge of things. And that's where you are. And you're going to talk to us about broadening digital access and supporting student well-being through data-based decision-making. James, welcome.
Thank you very much indeed. And obviously I have the honor of being the final speaking slot. So I'm the person keeping you from rest and relaxation. So I'll move at pace. I'll keep it going. I'll try and project and just keep the energy up. So I've been working with universities for 30 years now, literally since 1992. And launched digital platforms with them, with Stanford, with Toronto, from Hong Kong to Cape Town to Moscow. Dealt with thousands of universities. And my own journey in this is I started this business, Kortex, in 2012-13, with the aim of really focusing on how technology can support students and actually how student interaction with learning content actually can be brought to life, and how it can, the teaching and learning process can be reimagined. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that on our journey, and then how that has really intersected in terms of what we've learned around support networks for students in this new environment. So we are the leading enterprise level higher ed learning and engagement platform. Any learner can discover us and use us, and it connects learners to their resources, their institution, their peers, and their academics, and facilitates effective, digitally enhanced, data-driven teaching and learning. And we're doing this on the basis of being able to impact learning globally, enhance people's lives, and be involved in educating the next generation of difference makers, really based on the fundamental change in the delivery and consumption of learning in a way that improves outcomes as a result of digital transformation and, of course, AI. Now, that sort of process has really changed over time. We really see ourselves, and I think this is a new concept, as a learning experience and engagement layer that sits on top of the virtual learning environment. And I think it's really important when we start to think about the VLE with the lowest common construct being the module or the course itself or the program. We're about an individualized ability for students to be able to personalize that experience, and likewise for academics to deliver a unique experience to students. That engagement with the course and the engagement with the materials creates this incredibly rich data layer that then actually provides a feedback loop on how best to support students and actually how to identify early when problems may be occurring. So we think about things in the construct of administration, setup, discovery, acquisition, reading list, the individual student learning space, the academic set of tools and services they bring to bear on content in the course, the content itself, and then obviously the insights and the data side. And I think this is the part that becomes ever more important. So all of that is about connection through the existing ecosystem that is in place at institutions. Most of the time that consists of either the VLE, LMS, Blackboard, Canvas, Moodle, D2L. Increasingly, we see Microsoft Teams, we see other LMSs, VLEs. But it's that journey that starts there. And when we start to reimagine an environment for students that is more hybrid, that is more around connecting with the institution, both remotely and also while on campus, it encompasses a seamless journey that actually makes students feel connected to their institution and to their course. And that facilitates a whole load of different workflows. And again, it's these mechanisms and these workflows that creates the interaction and ultimately ends up creating the experience. And ultimately from that, the flow of data. And then the use of that data in how it can be and how students can actually then be best supported. So we facilitate a whole environment and experience around the content. Now that content can be anything. It can be all of the learning materials as supplied by leading publishers in their textbooks. So Pearson, McGraw, Wiley. It can be university materials. It can be YouTube videos. It could be other websites. But it's about creating the single layer of consumption that supports that engagement. So from within the VLE, we basically support a whole array of different processes and work streams, from reading lists through to activities that the academic sets up, and actually direct access to the content specifically aligned with the course, with the construct of the pedagogy more focused around online delivery. So pre-COVID, digital transformation was talked about a lot. It was incredibly important. It was raised in the UN sets of goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, but it was slow. There was a lot of talk and not very much action. COVID has been an absolute game changer. And I'm sure everybody in this room actually ended up on the back foot. And this happened across the sector and across the world. This is every institution across every single country. It was chaos to start with. Many universities believing they had an online mechanism of delivery, but actually discovering that the student experience through that mechanism was really poor. And that really impacted students. And I'm sure everybody listening has got experience of that and stories around student experience during this last 2 years. So what it certainly did do is it accelerated online delivery and the thought processes around the infrastructure to support online delivery and the mechanisms of that delivery. But it also tired everybody out. The students themselves, the academics, the institutions, people in the middle. I mean, it was hard work. But at the end of it, there's now a set of, some reasonable common understanding around some of the lessons learned and how some of those lessons can be applied. So for us, it was an extraordinary couple of years. We went from a team of 50 to 200, 160 universities to 2,300 universities. I mean, it went mad. So we had about 1 million ebooks aggregated. We've gone 4 million education ebooks and videos, including university content, university created materials. 4,700 different publishers. We have to get our content online, and we have to get it out to users, to students, to academics, to institutions. We became that delivery vehicle. But really interestingly, the whole set of discussion has moved beyond access to the content to the application and the use of that content. How do you think about the delivery of learning tools that are seamlessly integrated into the learning environment? And how then can you think about the data and the engagement analytics that comes off the back of that to best support students? All in the name of driving an improved experience and obviously the retention, the progression, and final outcomes. So for us, that really triggered a massive sprint in development of what we needed to do and engagement with institutions around support for student engagement. So supporting all language content, enabling things like translation in the content. You can highlight text and translate it into one of 120 different languages. Read aloud to support different learning styles, different learning modalities. So somebody can highlight English language text and read it aloud in Arabic. Again, just a whole array of tools, embedding assessment into the content, thinking about different types of content. So bringing video content to bear, podcasts, audio content, and facilitating the mechanisms for the academic to discover that, align it with the course, and actually get back to the students, while at the same time enabling students to be able to access and use content both online and offline. So just a huge amount of work involved in trying to actually support that student engagement. And look, research backs up how important this has become. So we undertook with UPOL a university leaders research survey. 97% of those university leaders interviewed basically said student expectations were now becoming a leading influencer thinking about changes in teaching and learning. 80% of university leaders were looking to adopt a more blended approach to learning, driven by both student expectations, pedagogic innovation, and technological advancement. So this also then highlighted real concerns around student well-being, student inclusion, pedagogy, obviously, digital infrastructure. And how do you support that student academic engagement, which was live in real time in the lecture theatre, but actually very different online? And so I think allied to that was a realization of some of students' own financial struggles and how universities could best support that. So really it's now become this focus on a more blended future, improving student well-being by creating a culture of community and care within teaching and learning, and enabling connection between the course and the engagement with the course with other support mechanisms. Student surveys, not just in this country, but all over, highlighted many of the same problems. 1 in 10 students felt they didn't belong at their university. Nearly 40% experienced imposter syndrome and a real lack of confidence in their academic abilities as a result of being separated from that experience. And 35% of them over this last couple of years were struggling with loneliness. It's clear that universities need solutions that facilitate peer-to-peer connections, collaboration, and community. And I think that's a really important component when thinking about a mixed hybrid type delivery model. The UK National Union of Students research also highlighted again the major concern of student financial worries. But in other organizations, so there's an organization in the UK called JISC, which manages the Janet network for universities across the UK, the high-speed internet network, basically talking about just get the basics right. Obviously Wi-Fi, reliable hardware, but also clear navigation to learning content and session scheduling, and alignment of that within the VLE, and a direct route for the students to get to that content to study. Now, all of that research really created this broader context across higher ed. Enrollment and retention challenges, inclusive teaching, and really this whole issue of the attainment gap, flexible delivery and modality becoming ever increasingly important, student expectations, and then obviously the student experience driving retention and well-being. And we've seen this from the data. And if you think about all those universities using content and delivering content through us, here's one example at Aston where a UK institution, but with students accessing their course and their content from over 111 different countries, 1,800 cities and towns. 16% of all usage came from outside of the UK. Now, we've seen, across the sector as a whole, a huge disparity in terms of access to the environment, to materials, but also the realization that students want that connectivity regardless of whether they're on holiday, they're taking a sabbatical, they can't come onto campus. They still need that connectivity. This is a great example where our data is beginning to be used in terms of academics assigning specific reading and then being able to understand whether students are engaging with that content straight away in real time. And I think what was really interesting about this example, where not only can you start to see the learning journeys through the content, and the journey we're on is trying to understand the specific learning objects delivered, and actually then thinking about the application of AI in bringing other content to bear. And this also aligns to sort of skills type components too. And I know that you're going to hear from Salar Makat about critical thinking. And I think this is a key area in understanding what students are struggling with and thinking about, and how other content may be really applicable to them. That user engagement drives those interactions. And then seeing some of the feedback from the academic staff, and for me, it's the final paragraph on the left here, where the academic was talking about the online access to this material for every single student in their own personalized space where they could interact with it, collaborate, share, create notes, and actually do better in their exams. Likewise, then, you start to see more and more institutions using the data to identify students early who may be struggling. And then what are the mechanisms that the institutions to deploy to actually support those students? For me, this ends up being what it's all about. I mean, it doesn't, this is fantastic feedback from an individual, effectively saying, right, I was able to maintain that connectivity through this period, have access to online materials, and continue to study in whatever way I wanted to as a result of that. Now, the data is really interesting because people I think, get lost in the data in terms of what you can do, what it's about. That we could generate data on every single touch point, but actually it's about the application of that data and the decision-making processes you want to drive from it. And I think one of the things that we've seen through our partnerships with universities is a different focus on thinking about the data, obviously in terms of academic engagement, but then also in the context of well-being. And I think there are all sorts of different examples of where you can see the engagement with the material and begin to understand where students are struggling. And you can look at this data across anything. You can rank this by titles, by student, by module, by course, by institution. See all of the activity, the annotations, the highlighting, the collaboration, and actually think about what does that mean in the context of all the students on a particular module and those that are now not engaging, and how does that relate then in terms of actual assessment, and those two components really being able to determine outcomes. We enable drill down into any specific part, and then obviously the individual student activity around the content. One of the things that came off of that in terms of the partnerships that we have was then, how do you actually think about student well-being? And one of the things that we did in partnership with a few of our key universities was actually link up with a body called Student Minds in terms of being able to offer access to help and resources at the point of need and at the point of study. We found students were spending an inordinate number of hours overnight studying, and actually, is that a time when they want to access different resources? So we did this in partnership with others. I mean, Manchester, Exeter. We've done a lot of work with the Arab Academy of Science and Technology. And really that led to the inclusion of a mechanism for students right from their point of study to be able to go through to materials and actually ask for and connect to help directly there and independently of their institution. So yes, they can connect to the institution, but actually there's an ability to connect them to resources and help outside of the institution as well. And we saw a massive take up of this. And so as a consequence, and seeing this through the data, we're going to build out more support networks, more support capabilities in terms of actually engaging with students at that point of study and need. And I think I mean, we've all witnessed the impact of remote learning. We've all witnessed that I mean, I, for one, certainly in my own children, but also then the higher ed level too. There really was a big increase in mental health issues that came as a result of COVID. But as universities think about an evolving future, there needs to be a mechanism to really drive that connectivity, that engagement with the institution, that connectivity with their peers, and how they really engage and understand where problems may start to occur. So, in terms of a summary of all of that, look, part of this is around the attainment gap. What does this look like in terms of utilizing content, data, and tools to really identify students needing more support? There is that opportunity with online engagement. And there is going to be a massive growth in online learning. That train has left the station and it's only going to continue. But it represents a real opportunity too, particularly in relation to the application of AI and other technologies in support of those students. There's a whole mechanism of how this feeds into lifelong learning and an opportunity again to keep those students connected to their peers from their course, peers more broadly as they actually go through their careers. Connecting all of those points and creating that seamless experience, though, is essential. And the VLE on its own is not the answer. But actually, if you do that, you then have this opportunity to really feed that into student well-being and support networks that really do give students the ability, wherever they are, to actually get help as and when they need it, either academic or from the context of mental health and their own well-being. I'm going to end. I have, I think, if it plays, a 1-minute video of just seeing some of that within the construct of one particular course. This is Oxford Brookes University and their MBA program, and hopefully you can hear this.
The provision of those learning materials and those core materials is part and parcel of our relationship with the students. And it's if we handle that at a program level, it makes it much more flexible to really respond to the needs within the program, both from the tutor perspective and from the student perspective. And a real good benefit of doing it through Kortex rather than through the library is also that students own that book in perpetuity. So their access to Kortex is not linked to them being a student on the program. The program values of connect, collaborate, and create. And that's important in the context of talking about why Kortex, because it's not a sort of self-study when they're doing it online. We are connecting the students to each other, we're connecting the students to the university, and making a big effort to also connect both when they're coming on campus, but also when they're studying online, with a huge emphasis on a sort of creative problem solving, can-do approaches and an entrepreneurial perspective. So it's therefore really important that they have a sort of a parity of experience between those. But the other really important element in that is that access to learning materials, which should be the same wherever students are and whatever mode they're taking the module in. Our virtual learning environment is, of course, central in that. And of course, the online library is important, in terms of particularly ensuring that textbooks are fully accessible. It's much more cost-effective and easier to deploy if we actually do the core reading through the Kortex platform, so that students, wherever they are and whatever type of, whichever modes they study in, have that same level of access. Sort of in terms from a program management perspective, I've been looking at patterns in engagement and activities, because we design, the way we do the online teaching in particular around assumptions around when our students are able to engage. We think it's weekends, we think it's probably evenings, and that sort of, again, helps to make some decisions in terms of how we design learning activities. That's just a little example.
So hopefully, That's it. Thank you for listening. And, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, James. Yet another example, I think, of really joined up thinking. And yet another example of what we've been hearing from several speakers during the day about putting the student first, thinking of the thing through the lens of the student. But those are my off the top observations. Any questions?
This is me again, Reem Al-Bainin from Bahrain Polytechnic. Thank you for this informative presentation. I have a question. I know that accessibility is not the issue. I know now it is easier to access all the material and books here. However, accessibility is not the biggest issue because all these resources are available. Maybe you put it in a different structure. Yes, it is important. I just would like to ask to what extent this can enhance individuality. Are there anything to make this individual to my learning experience as a student? So are they going to offer me resources related to my, I would like to know more how this will enhance individuality and of each learning and learning with all these resources. This is my first question. The second question, we have Inclusion Institute, and we have a lot of students with learning differences and a student with special needs, and some of them with the dyslexia, some of them with, any other issues. And to what extent this platform or content platform is going to provide them easy access and to enhance their learning experience. Thank you very much.
These are great questions. Thank you. So I think let's separate them out, and I'll answer your first question first, just in terms of more than just access. I think that when you start to bring the course delivery and the pedagogic structure of the course and align that with materials that are supporting the specific learning objects, you end up being able to create an environment where every single learner can personalize their experience. So first off, if you and I were to take an MBA, our end goal is the same, but our journey to that end goal is going to be very different. You may be a whiz in finance, I may be good in marketing, you're going to need more time to go through that particular set of components of the course, whereas I may not, and it may be something else. And so I think the opportunity is to create the scaffolding where particularly AI can come to bear to understand your journey and bring other content to bear. And again, that other content is about supporting different learning differences. So you may absolutely, I may be someone who reads at 2 o'clock in the morning, you may be someone who consumes in short video, the YouTube generation. And so there's an opportunity to begin to understand that and to bring different content to bear that could be covering the same subject area, but actually have a very different impact on you versus me. So you're building that scaffolding and that framework to be able to facilitate that. I think when you then come into the question of those learning differences specifically, we're very fortunate. We have a global partnership with Microsoft, and we work with them all over the world. I'm very lucky. I get to go to Seattle a couple of times a year and see some of the developments that go on there. And I think for me, again, the opportunity to think about technology to be applied to support those learning differences, from dyslexic font through to just single line read back with different modulation, different tones, different speeds. There are a whole range of different tools that now can be applied to the content to support those differences. And I actually think we've definitely scratched the surface, but there is a long way to go. But there is some fantastic research being created looking at different tools, different technologies, and the outcomes of that in the context of the student experience and their actual individual ability to comprehend the content, utilize it, engage with it, and learn from it. So look, we don't solve every problem, absolutely not. But I think we're on a really interesting path where you're bringing the content with the course and connecting the people all together in a way that you can actually be supportive of each and every individual learner. Hopefully that answered a little bit.
Well, thank you very much. One more question.
Thank you. I think it would be fascinating if you can share with us a little bit more about what have you learned about learning.
I have two children, one of 12 and one of 9. And every day I'm learning about learning. Yeah, I think that's a great question. Somebody else mentioned just around the, I think it was in relation to the EKB project in Egypt and the longitudinal data needed to really be able to understand some of the impact factors. I think that coming back to the question that was raised just now, one of the biggest things is just how different individual learners are. During the pandemic, we had a fascinating, if you looked at the big red brick institutions in the UK, every single engineering course, pretty much without exception, the majority of study was done from 11 o'clock at night till 4 o'clock in the morning. Social science programs were very different. You start to think about that in the context of those different individual learners and how do you support that? And one of the points that Diana was making at Oxford Brookes was, again, looking at the data to understand when interaction happens. At one of the universities in London, Middlesex, they have 70% of their student cohort travels more than an hour and a half to get onto campus. They absolutely want a different mechanism to engage with their course and their content. They don't want to travel for 3 hours in a day for a 1-hour lecture. So I think that we're at the beginning stages of learning. There is a lot more data to compile. And I think the thing that I've learned the most is really trying to look at leading indicators to actually drive support mechanisms to actually get behind and support students. And I think that's an opportunity that exists with digital engagement. And that in and of itself, now there are all sorts of reasons for why students may start to struggle. It's not just academic, but actually there are huge differences in just how different people interact with their course. I'll give you one other quick example. At the University of Manchester, Manchester has a non-continuation rate of about 1.5%, which is not too bad. 40,000 students, that's still quite a lot. However, when you segment that and you look at students who actually do not come onto campus, as in they don't reside on campus, they're not in campus digs, they are based principally from home, i.e. there is a real issue there from a financial perspective, the non-continuation rate is 17%. Wow. So you get these really big variations. And so I think the learning that I'm going through is there are just so many factors involved. You can't make a knee-jerk reaction. I think it's more about continually actually trying to understand what students are looking for and how they can be best supported. So I hope that.
Well, we've had some great questions today, and I thank all of you for engaging in the way that you have with all of the sessions today, actually. James, I thank you and all of our speakers today. I think we've quite a lot to live up to.